Welcome to Podfic galore. I'm your horrible online reader, Goldscythe. I read out loud fanfictions for you busy bees, free of charge and no strings attached. Today I will continue reading the Silmarillion fic by Aeolian Sands from Archive of Our Own, called The Rescue Party. I hope you can at least try to enjoy my voice, and I will try my best for you with the equipment available to me. On with the show. The Rescue Party, Chapter 33. Hour of Victory. Rogue listened in the blackness to the sound of tearing fabric. Their first torches had burned out hours ago, and now the town was tracked not by the journey of Arien, but by how quickly Fëanor burned through his clothes. The sticks had also long ago turned to ash, and although Fëanor had first considered using his blade instead, Rogue had been quick to stop that idea. Thus, the former king had wrapped the shreds of his tunic around a broken stalactite. The Lord of the Hammer wondered if anyone else ever thought to attack a fallen Vala while half naked and holding a flaming rock. He very much doubted it. Yet, he did have to credit the Noldo for his ingenuity. Rogue was humming one of his working songs to himself when suddenly he noticed a dim, flickering light ahead of them. It was not the bright flame of Fëanor's cloth-wrapped stalactite. No. This came from a distance, and was a grim, dark orange. "Hush! Listen!" Ecthelion whispered, the urgency in his command clear. At once the group halted. And then they heard it. A rumbling in the ground like that of rolling stones. Or of marching feet. Rogue looked ahead of them at the glowing light as understanding dawned on him. "We're not alone," he muttered. Fëanor dropped his newly fashioned torch to the ground and stamped it out. "Quick, follow me, quietly," he commanded. And the 4 other elves ran on light feet towards the light, skidding to a stop when they saw that they had come to an end of their tunnel at last. Yet the tunnel did not end in a smithy of Angband or any other cavern. No, it simply intersected another, far greater tunnel that ran perpendicular to it. From where they stood, the 5 elves looked out into what appeared to be a great subterranean road, along which hordes of orcs marched carrying dim torches and lanterns. All were dressed in grotesque armor with crude steel weapons at their hips. To war we march!" they chanted, and the streams continued ever onward. Luckily, none thought to look into a small side tunnel where the elves stood in shock. Rogue paled. "Compass! Does anyone have a compass?" he asked, but all his companions shook their heads. Yet there was no need, for the next cry that went up from the creatures made it all too clear their destination.
"To Gondolin! Cook the elves in their own city! Cook and devour! Tasty, tasty!"
A particularly large orc, with hands too large for its body and a face too small, shouted. It raised its spiked club in the air, and those around it cheered.
"Tasty, tasty!"
the cry echoed. "They march for Orndolinda," Glorfindel said in dread. "We must go back. We must warn the king."
"No!" Orodhel hissed. "It's too late. You will never reach my brother in time."
"We have to try. It's not like 5 of us can hold them off. How many armies have already passed this way?" "But orcs and trolls are slow."
"We can be swift. We can make it. I know we can."
"No, Laura. Princess Edith is right. We will never make it in time, and who knows if the cave mouth is still open. We knew this might be a trap."
"I can't just let them die. If I survive, and all my people and my king die, then I will never forgive myself."
"Who says anything about dying?" Fëanor snapped. "I tried that once. Not again." "You plan to take the literal streams of orcs?" "Why not?" Fëanor asked, just as a great balrog wreathed in flames staggered by their tunnel. His smile faded. "On second thought, I'm glad you remember your death after all. It wasn't the most forgetful experience. I didn't realize that there would be balrogs too."
"Let's go in disguise," said Orodhel.
"Unfortunately, and I never thought I would say this, but Ara is not here." "I wasn't aware anyone besides his brood was gifted in concealment songs," Fëanor answered. "No, we could kill a few orcs and take their armor." Rogue looked at the lithe princess and raised an eyebrow. "Forgive me, my lady, but none of that armor is going to fit you, and even if it did, no one is going to mistake you for an orc."
"Then what do you suppose, intelligent one?"
"Well, you aren't going to like it. Glorfindel, especially, is going to cry." "What?" the blonde in question asked. Rog simply set his hammer down and reached for the dagger in his boot. With his free hand he grabbed Glorfindel's shoulder and spun him around. Then, in one swift stroke, cut through the golden hair he loved so much. Glorfindel, to his credit, did not scream, but he stood in abject horror and stupor like one struck by lightning. He watched wide-eyed as fair strands fell from Rog's hands to the floor. He reached up to touch the sheared ends that danced around his shoulder. Be thankful I didn't take more. Most thralls aren't allowed anywhere near that length. It will grow back, but coming back from the dead? That is less certain. You mean us to go disguised as slaves? Aradhel realized. Got any better idea? Well, you already sacrificed Laura's hair and rendered him mute, so your plan it is. She held her hand out for the dagger. Rog gave it to her. Without hesitating, she sliced through her long dark hair in 2 swift hacks. Then she promptly handed the knife back. Fëanor sighed. Nola and Ara are never going to let me live this one down. They will mock me for however many decades it takes to grow back. Then he too sheared his raven hair. It doesn't take decades, Rog answered. I bet someone will be able to sing a pretty song that makes it grow long again. Besides, he winked, you are about the only elf I know that might be able to pull off this look. Fëanor looked at Aradhel. My niece can make it work all right, but... Then he looked at Glorfindel and snickered, unable to keep his laughter in. Stop! You're really going to make him cry! Aradhel chastised her uncle. I'm not going to cry, answered Glorfindel, though his voice wasn't as strong as usual. I simply won't look at myself. And if we ever return to King Turkana alive, I shall not be the one to explain. Now, is Silver Fountain over there done unbraiding, or is he in mourning? Ecthelion rolled his eyes and ran a hand through his now unbound locks that ran down to his waist. He then stepped forward so that his back was to Rog. You are truly a hypocrite, Laura, but I guess at least Makalaura is not with us. He would have felt the need to compose some funeral dirge for your lost dignity. Rog smiled at that, then took Ecthelion's hair in his hand and cut it as well. Do mine now, he asked him, turning around. Then find that burning stalactite and smear ash over your skin. Tear your coats too. Not you, Lord Fëanor. Cut any more of that abused tunic and you will be naked, which will reveal you to be far too well fed. Fed? I have eaten only apples. I'm not the one to blame for that. Rog eyed Aradhel pointedly. The ashes from the torch were passed around, and sounds of ripping fabric and silk were heard, but thankfully the marching feet and clanging armor of the hordes in the main tunnel kept the noise from reaching enemy ears. When they were finished, Rog looked about at his companions and smiled ruefully. No one looked very princely anymore. Their once fine clothing had been reduced to shredded rags, and everyone's hair was in truly dishonorable and hideous state. Yet everyone's eyes were still burning far too fiercely. Do try to look a bit more defeated, Rog pleaded. Then he lightly and gently bound his companion's hands with strips of fabric. What about our swords? Ecthelion asked, looking at his cherished blade, which was currently propped up against the tunnel wall. Leave them, Rog ordered. They will become a treasure for trolls, Fëanor noted. Would you rather your sword end up in a troll cave, or be used to cut your own head off? It's not even my sword, Fëanor mumbled. I don't know where my sword ended up. I haven't seen it since the first battle. Probably in a troll cave, Glorfindel answered. Or Lord Maedhros has it somewhere in Himring, answered Rog. Anyhow, stop crying about your swords. We have a counselor to rescue, right? Then all nodded. Rog went to the front and waved everyone to follow him single file into the marching armies. Turgon guided his destrier through the rocky mountain terrain. If he looked up, he could see the caves and crevices in the cliff faces where Duilin and Egil most likely had stationed their archers. Ahead of him stood towering pines, their tops enshrouded in the mist of the mountains. The lack of visibility and the cool of the day concerned the king, for it did not bode well for a successful ambush. Plus, he was deeply concerned about how he had not yet seen any warriors aside from those of his own house, which followed behind. Then, out of the fog ahead of him, a single figure emerged. He was sitting on a great black horse with a long, ragged mane and tail. His silver-green armor resembled scales, and it reflected the minimal amount of sunlight that filtered through the mist. Turgon realized then that he had never seen an Ainu prepared for war. My lord Osse, he said, drawing his horse beside the Maias. While Turgon's mount stood proud and stout, something was otherworldly and strange about the wispy creature next to it. Turgon noted that Osse used no bridle or saddle. King Turkano,
Ossa said. The earth shakes. So it does. Where's the rest of the hammer? Where are the other houses? I see no one. The fog hides them well. Just then there was heard the steady beat of war drums. Turgon felt the vibrations in his soul, and soon his heart beat in time. They come, said Osse. See that cliff to the left? I have left room for your men to station there. When the orcs come, let them pass until the time is at hand. We shall attack this valley from either side. Findarata will be there to reinforce us, but we will have to hold off the first waves. Turgon was about to ask about when the time would be at hand, but Osse was already motioning him to the left. Go! There's no time. Maidan led his host over the mountain passes and through the valleys. They were close now. Soon that cowardly city would simply be over the next mountain, and the rivers of fire would flow into the valley of Tumladen. Then, in the far distance, he saw a single horse standing on a small hill with a coat black as coal.
Someone's there,
the beast beneath him hissed. At first, Maidan figured out it was an outlaw or some other brazen traveler, but then the fog parted for a moment's glance, and he caught the glowing green eye of that black horse, and recognized it instantly. Kelpie, he said.
Who's that?
Glaurung asked as they approached, sudden alarm shooting down Maidan's veins. Osse's pet. It normally never leaves the swamps near the sea.
Why does it not run?
Maidan kicked the dragon. Don't slow your march. One Maya is an ant to the boot of our might. Yet Maidan eyed the water horse uneasily. The fog swirled around it in a ghostly, menacing way. When the dragon was within a few hundred feet, the rider called out, Halt! You are not welcome here! Go back to the foul dungeons! Riotous cheering and laughter came from the ranks. Maidan held up his hand, and the fearful armies quieted. Osse, I have never seen you so far inland. Are you lost? More snickering from the army, followed by uneasy shifting. Osse withdrew a claymore bejeweled with pearls, green chrysoberyl, and aquamarine gems, interlaced with silver and mithril threads. No, traitorous spirit! I am where I belong! Sauron's soul filled with dread, and he snapped his arm up, signaling for the two Balrogs in his host to rush the offending ocean fiend. They came running, flaming giants that swatted ancient trees aside like saplings. At once they were upon the water horse and its rider, but Kelpie reared and let loose a shriek that rattled the mountains. Whips of fire shot for the horse's legs, but Kelpie ignored them and charged. Be gone! Osse shouted, and his sword was like a shot of crystal as Kelpie leapt. Holding the handle with both hands, Osse drove it straight into the black chest of the Balrog, who did not expect such a sudden and swift offense. The fell demon bellowed as black blood streamed down from its heart, then fell backward like a coughing iceberg. Osse did not let go of the sword embedded in its breast, but let the downward arc of the dying Balrog pull him up and out of the saddle. As the demon crashed on its back, Osse wrenched the claymore out of its body and stood on its chest, staring at the hordes for a brief moment before he was forced to jump over the other's whip of flame. Turgon watched the first Balrog fall, and knew now was the time. Raising his sword, Glomdring, the foehammer, he shouted so that all the land heard his commanding voice. Sina Aure! God follower! He cried as he kicked his warhorse forward. God follower! The warriors of Gondolin echoed, and from the east and the west they charged into the valley to meet the stunned orcs below. It was Osse standing atop of the small hill with the Balrog's whip wrapped around his sword, and Kelpie fighting at his side, who best saw the charge of Gondolithrim as they poured from the cliffs and mountains. At the moment of King Turgon's cry, "This day we defend!" the mist had parted, and the sun glittered off the armors of elves as they ran towards without fear, or perhaps it is best said that they ran forward in spite of fear. The clash of metal when elven blade met orcish steel rebounded off the rocks. Osse smiled feral and wild. He felt the air in the distance taste of his beloved sea, and in the atmosphere the slight charge of storms. God Thalwer! He repeated, and then he flung his sword down in an arc. So great was his strength that the Balrog, still holding the burning whip, was slingshotted into the ground. Ossa wrenched his weapon free and turned to see Kelpie galloping for him. Reaching with one strong arm, he grabbed the horse's neck and threw himself onto its back. In moments, they were upon the Balrog. "Be free, foul servant of darkness!" the Ocean Maya shouted as he reached to plunge the claymore into the demon's exposed back. But then the air charged in warning, and a great burst of flame ushered forward from behind the fallen Balrog. Kelpie swerved and fell in a desperate attempt to avoid the worst of it, also landing hard on his side. But the Maya was not immortal, and such a fall, though terrible, would not end him nor his loyal mount. They both stood then to see the great lizard with smoking nostrils, Sauron still mounted on his back. "That was cute," the fallen Maya said, "but I rather like that useless pile of ash. I prefer you not kill him yet." The Glaurung, the great worm, chuckled in a deep voice like a furnace, and opened its mouth to deliver another torrent of flame, this time aimed directly at Ossi and valiant Kelpie. There was no time to shapeshift to something with wings, but Ossi was not called the Master of Storms for no reason. He sang a few words of his own song, the song he had sang in the Ainulindale. When a great mass of fire was upon him, a sudden storm cloud split above them, and a great cascade of water fell on the dragon as the thundering waterfalls at the end of the world. Ossi immediately leapt on Kelpie's back again.
"You think you know of elemental power?" he cried. "You merely play with fire, lizard, but I help to make the very waters. Do not test me in your pride."
Glaurung was drenched and furious. He snorted and charged at Ossi and Kelpie like a writhing snake. The horse and rider leapt aside, and only then did the Maya realize that Sauron was no longer on its back. The clash of arms was the marriage of violence and chaos. Turgon fought on horseback side by side with his faithful personal guard. He swung glumering in an arc, cleaving an orcish arm in two just before a loyal guardsman drove a dagger into its heart. Steadily, they cut further and further into the valley until a foul arrow struck Turgon's destrier in the heart. It collapsed with a cry of agony, and Turgon rolled on the ground as he fell from the saddle. Yet there was no time to mourn the animal when a sword was driving for his head. He intercepted it with grace, then swept it aside, lunging for the legs, and crippling the orc that wielded it. Then, the flash of a spear, and the king had just moments to swipe it away. Some large, hideous creature pushed him back, and he danced out of the reach. Never did Turgon stay in one spot long. For a few moments, it was one of Glorfindel's soldiers defending his back, and the next he intercepted a spear thrust at Benlod's young captain. Looking about, he saw that he had been separated from his house, yet his trust in them was complete.
"And they thought they could take on Underlinde!"
A cheerful voice shouted from behind. Turgon turned to see Lord Galdor swinging his spiked club.
"Already I have broken 24 knees! How many more shall fall?"
Turgon smiled, then ducked out of the way of an arrow. It did seem strange. He had expected a larger force. He thrust his sword into another orc, and turned back to look for Galdor, but saw him not. Instead, there was one with golden hair sulking back towards the trees. The rage that seeped into Turgon's blood then was as fire. The coward! Was this not his war, his twisted hordes, and his grand plan to return to his master with his city as a gift? Turgon ran after him.
"Fight!"
the king declared in his great voice like that of his father.
"Fight me, Sauron, tormentor of Angamando!"
The look of fear flashed across the Umayya's face. Turgon was disgusted at once. Yet then the foul spirit unsheathed his sword. "Son of Nolofinwe, you are as brash and stupid as your sire. You're but an elf, yet you expect to take one of the holy ones." "You are not holy, Sauron." The Umayya snarled and lunged. Turgon intercepted his blade, glumdring ringing clear as the morning light. Sauron countered and attacked low, pressing forward, but the king's blade was there, blocking with expert skill. A blow then to Turgon's right guard, one aimed to cleave his stomach, yet the king was moving in an unstoppable rhythm. He shot his blade to the side and drew blood from Sauron's shoulder. Sauron hissed, and taking his blade in both hands, thrust it straight at Turgon's heart. The Elven King ducked, only to realize that an orc had found them. A butted footman kicked to his head, so Turgon rolled twice in the dirt before leaping to his feet. In a moment's time, he jumped and beheaded the orc who had dared to interfere. Looking up, he saw Sauron backing into the trees once more. A roar of fire and the unnatural screeching of an unnatural horse was heard across the valley. Turgon looked up to see the battle between Osse and the dragon and the Balrog. He had to end this now. "We got your back!" rang a familiar voice. The king turned and saw Galdor and several of the tree. "Go slay that Amaya!" The other lord winked. So Turgon charged, taking 3 great steps, then leaping to strike at Sauron's head. The servant of Morgoth blocked, but he was weak. "That's right. Enwë already gave you the taste of your own medicine," Turgon hissed through locked blades. Then, without further hesitation, he brought Glamdring to bear. Left, right, counter and strike, he drove the tormentor ever backward until his back was to a towering tree. Turgon knew that victory was nigh. Sauron was rapidly tiring. He wondered briefly what it would mean to kill one who had sung the Ainulindale. But then he saw the arrows of Egalmoth and Duilin's people fly overhead, heard the war cries of Rock's house from behind, and he knew that whatever black fate awaited him for slaying an Ainu mattered little if he could protect those who depended on him. He swung gleaming Glamdring with all his might at the lieutenant's neck, confident that Sauron had not the strength to block this final blow. Then a great yell from on high shattered through the noise of the battle. Momentarily distracted, the king and Sauron both looked up to see the dark, pale form of Thuringwethil diving straight for them. From the skies in the north, Thuri saw Mairon's strength failing.
"He was never made for battle. He's a commander, a strategist, a lord."
She cursed then Morgoth with every fibre in her being.
"Blackfoe truly be your proper name. How dare you send one so loyal to you to battle, bound in a mortal form?"
Then he saw the damnable king of Gondolin aim for a final blow with that elven blade of his, and she realized she was still too far away. With her full spirit, she screamed in rage and fear, flying at the speed of a racing fire to reach them in time. But she could tell that she would be too late. No tale was told how Thuringwethil accomplished what she did that day. Whether it was an act of hatred, fear, desperation, or quite possibly one of great love, no lore master truly knows. Yet with that final desperate cry, Thuringwethil, the herald of Sauron, gave her full self to her beloved master. With all her power she focused her thought and song on the bonds of Eonwe and hewed them, freeing the lieutenant of Morgoth from his mortal form. She crashed to her ground on her knees, entirely spent in spirit and mind, and even as she fell before the feet of Turgon, king of Gondolin, Sauron the abhorred shifted forms to that of a vampire and fled to the skies. Osse and Kelpie danced between whip and fire without a hint of tiring, for the strength came from beyond the borders of the world, and for long ages it had laid at rest. Kelpie reared, tossing his mane, rejoicing in his strength.
"Stop moving!"
The dragon hissed in fury as it spit another fireball. Osse called on the winds to send the flaming sphere into the earth as he and Kelpie galloped past. The whip aimed at Kelpie's hind leg was far too late, the end of the lashes hitting Glaurung's nose instead. The beast roared in fury. Already it had been soaked and humiliated. Then the Balrog and dragon turned at once to face the Maya. Osse decided it was time that they tasted their own tea. He sat back on Kelpie's back and sang a few notes, calling on the heavens above. This time, instead of one sudden cloudburst, the whole sky grew black. Osse's fauna shimmered, and he answered in a deep voice of the sea.
"I have stopped, beast."
Glaurung opened his mouth, but Osse brought his arms up and called the dreadful lightning down. 2 bolts he sent thundering from the heavens, one aimed at the fire demon and the other at the fire drake. Both fell, cold and dead, with smoking wounds in their chests. Osse breathed heavily as he noticed the ruined land around him. The broken husks of trees lay felled and burning. Mud was emerging from the depths to swallow the once green grasses. Then Osse saw an elven warrior lying dead, spear in hand. It looked as if he had tried to approach the dragon from behind. Someone who had tried to help despite having little hope against the serpent. Osse realized at once that his lightning had killed him. The shock was ice in the ocean spirit's veins. He had never meant to kill one of the children. With shaking hands, he lay the body on its back and closed the sightless eyes.
Rest in peace, brave soldier of Ondalinde. You did well.
He sent the storm clouds away with a wave of his hand and a quiet song.
No more storms, Kelpie.
He told the horse, patting its neck.
Today we must only defend and protect the children. I shall not fail in that mission again.
Turgon stared in shock at the dead body of what appeared to be Amaya. She had pale skin and long dark hair, with wings like that of a bat extending out of her back. For a moment he was perplexed, for who would ever die for a torturer? Then there was a rushing wind behind him, and Eonwa stood there, chest heaving and out of breath. He immediately knelt beside the woman's body. Thori, he repeated as if in grief. My lord, the king asked in shock. Eonwa ignored him for a moment and kissed the fallen woman's hand. She's gone, Elven King. Perhaps she was always gone, but a small part of me kept... Well, it doesn't matter any longer. Who was she? She was my younger sister, fallen with Sauron. She made her choices, but in my heart of hearts, I held hope that she might turn from evil. Yet in truth, he sighed and stood. In truth, there was very little hope of that, and now there is no hope at all. My sister is dead, and Sauron has fled. Turgon saw a flicker of rage in Eonwa's sea-blue eyes. He's a coward, Eonwa murmured, looking at the skies. Then he removed the ivory horn from his belt and blew a great resounding cry. The very horn of Thuringwethil shattered the atmosphere of Ea, and no mortal ears would ever hear anything akin to it again until the end of all ages. Turgon felt eyes on his back and turned to see Galdor staring in shock. The lord swallowed. My king, the battle's nearly won. Does Eonwa herald our victory? But as Turgon looked across the valley to see the army of orcs fallen and many of his people standing triumphant, the foundations of the earth shook, the rocks beneath their feet groaning and trembling as if awaking from a dark slumber. A terrible cracking noise like 1,000 whips snapping in succession sounded, and the valley was torn asunder, a great crevice appearing in the ground. A cry of alarm went up from the elves as Turgon stumbled on the shifting ground and fell. Something was terribly wrong. The Dark Lord Melkor sat grinning in his subterranean throne as the entire continent of Beleriand splintered. Crevices and great rifts appeared in the land, and liquid fire flared in places. This truly was the hour of his victory. End of chapter 33. Stay tuned.